Hi, good morning. I'm Deepak, and today we will be going to talk about the fish and the uses of the fish in the culinary world. Uh, the point is, we have to understand what the fish is about, what is the anatomy of the fish, how does it live biologically. So, before we understand the fish, let's get the insight of the fish world. The fish are diverse animals, so each species has evolved to live successfully in its underwater environment. Now, the thing is, in this chapter, we will study about the classification of the fish, the common traits of the fish. These are basically the objective learnings what you have to understand in this chapter. So there are common traits, there are living habitats, there is a difference between the fish anatomy, what is internal like gills and all the process, how does it swim about, how does it live, how it maintains their temperature. Then we have the fishes, and we will classify the fish on the basis of the sweet water fish, the brackish water fish, and the seawater fish. There is one thing to understand. There is only one thing which is very common in all the fish or this mammals what you talk about, which lives in this underworld water. That they live in water and they have a backbone. Some of them might not be having, which might be a shellfish, but when we talk about the fish, then it have it. So we will continue with the fish. So this is the basic anatomy of a fish, which have basically the gills. There is a pectoral region, and I hope you can see this picture. And there is the nostrils and the tail cover and the tail fin. So we will slowly read about how the different parts of the animal are used in different manner and how it utilizes and how it even maintains the body temperature. So before we proceed further and go into all the depth of the fish, there is a little bit insight how much and what are about the fish is about and how many fishes are already there present and so on. So there are somewhat about like 32,000 different type of the fish, and it is according to the fish database. You can check out for the site on the national government sites where there are about the fisheries and other things in there. And it's a comprehensive database which is done by the researchers and the zoologists. And despite the thousand of different varieties of the species with the adaptation, all fish have some common evolutionary adaptations which help them to thrive in their water domain. While there are some rare exceptions to these rules, there are traits across these aquatic animals. So first thing which is there is that all fishes are cold-blooded, which also means they are ectothermic. The ectothermic means that a fish is unable to regulate the body temperature. Like you human beings, and we human beings, we can control our body temperature by the process of homeostasis, which we will go a little bit later. So fish is unable to regulate the body temperature, and it solely relies on the outside environment for the temperature regulation. And the body temperature of the fish changes as the environment temperature changes. So if the fish is in the water and there is a change in the temperature of the water, the fish will have a change in the body temperature. And this is exactly what we are mammals, and opposite to us, as we rely on the process to maintain a constant body temperature all the time. And many fishes are very sensitive to the temperature changes, and they are only able to exist in a specific water temperature. And other species are surviving in the wider range of temperatures. A fish body temperature fluctuates according to the water temperature around them, and as a result, colder water decrease fish body temperature, and which make them sluggish and which make them go dormant, means they are not moving during the cold spells. And you can see and take an example like in the winter months in a lake, the fish there is no movement. Then we have the fish which lives in a water habitat. These are all common traits, like the fish all are doing normally the same thing. So it's the another characteristic that all fish they live in water, but this may be too obvious to worth stating. But there are some fishes that can spend their significant amount of time out of the water. Mud skippers, it's a variety of fish. They don't live in water. They stay outside the water, and they eat and interact with each other on the land. And they often go underwater to hide them from the predators. And they do not have lungs, but they can breathe through their skin also. So this is a case of adaptation, and they keep their gills moist with the waters and this water that they store internally. So all fish live in water, but not everything that lives in a water is a fish. You can understand that whales and dolphins are mammals basically. They are classified into the biological structure, but anatomically, if we are talking about, then whales and dolphins are basically mammals. And turtles, if you talk about, they are reptiles. Turtles are not a fish at all. Uh, the another common trait among the fishes are that they have the gills to breathe. And when we talk about the gills to breathe, so this is one of the basic criteria for an animal to be classified as the fish. It is the presence of the gill, and it should be present throughout its life cycle. Gills are necessity for the underwater life, which allows the fish to absorb oxygen from the water. So gills are basically taking in the oxygen from the water, and of course they release the carbon dioxide. It's same as we have the lungs, and the lungs are doing the same procedure in the human beings. So for the fish, there are the gills, and this gills allows them to breathe even underwater. So all fish have basically gills, but some species of the fish living in extremely oxygen depleted environments have developed lungs as well. As with the living in water, all fish have gills, but not everything which has gills is a fish. Fish have gills throughout their lifespan. So while other species that have gills often lose them at some moment of time, you can take an example of a tadpole. Tadpole is what is you can call a young frog, and these frogs have gills, but they eventually lose them when they metamorphose themselves into the frog. So as the tadpoles grow bigger, their gills are gone, and the frog develop the lungs, and it starts to stay out of the water. Of course, it can go into the water, but the frogs goes out of the water. And the frog, we are already considering it as we are taking from the water, and frog legs is a delicacy in the old French classical menus. Then all fishes have the what you call the swim bladders, and which is a specialized organ, and this swim bladder is basically filled with the air that helps to ensure the fish maintains a stable bouncy in the water. Now the stable bouncy means that it can go up and it doesn't sink or it doesn't float too much. Unlike human beings, if we go into the water, we start to sink it out, but the swim bladder in the fishes usually keep the fish on the top and doesn't let the fish sink or float. So the presence of the swim bladder allows the fish to sleep, and it's without sinking to the bottom of its habitat. So even if the fish is sleeping, the swim bladder helps the fish to keep on moving on the top. And there are some exceptions, of course, and in some species of the fish, the air is swallowed, and this air which is swallowed is sent to the swim bladder, and this adaptation generally will help the fish to survive in the water which do not have adequate level of oxygen. And then the another trait is one of the last trait is the fish for the fins they are using for the movement. So fins are almost universal characteristic of the fish, and many type of fins exist. But if you have seen the picture on the last end, and I'll show you, there are spicy dorsal fins and soft dorsal fins. So they are at the specific places in the fish, and all of these fins are used for different kind of purposes. But there is one thing common, that there are a matching pair of the fins, no matter it's the dorsal fins or it's the side fins. They have all the fins equally on both the sides. So the general purpose of these fins is to provide the motion and the maneuverability and the stability to the fish, because when the fish is moving, these are the fins are helping them actually to be stable and to get a motion, and sometimes they want to stop it out. So these fins at different places do the different kind of work. For example, if you have the pelvic and the pectoral fins, which are on the first part, if you start from the face value or the mouth of the fish, they have pectoral fins. These allow the fish to maneuver and maintain the stability, while the dorsal, which are in the middle, or the ventral fins, which are on the side next to the ears, they reduce the rolling motion of the fish while the fish is swimming, and this aids the fish also during their turns. So if the fish is turning out, their dorsal and ventral fins, which actually come into action and helps them to get a slow motion moving. And the tail fin is, which is like acts as a propeller, and it propels the fish during their swimming times. So if you go about the specific shapes and specific sizes of the fish or the specific purposes, it is not set at all. These There are no actually shapes or sizes or even purposes for a particular kind of a fin. And fin use and the purpose, they all change because the fish have adapted themselves according to the need, what they want to do, and what is the need of that particular fin at that particular time. There is one thing, like how the fish maintains, because we always have a different, we will go further into the classification, but just to get a little review before we go. uh, Fishes comes from different water. There might be a cold water fish, and the temperature of the earth or the weather of the earth keep on changing. So there are fishes which generally have different temperature, like it can be cold water, it can be warm water, and it can be what you say, the uh, very chilled water when you go around the Antarctic region. So fish, they maintain homeostasis in different water temperature. But the thing is, fish doesn't have a homeostasis of their own. So how do they do it? This is what actually we gonna study in this. And to understand it, all fishes are basically the cold-blooded creatures, and most of them cannot control their internal temperature like the human beings. They have an issue with that. So in order to stay healthy and to be at maintain a normal temperature, which you call the homeostasis, the fish seeks warmer and colder water. This means that they might go to a warmer and a colder water and change their movement. And some fish also have additional mechanisms to keep the healthy temperature. Now, for heat creation, generally, if we see about the fish, like animals, create heat from the metabolic activity. And the metabolic activity means you are moving down and you are roaming around from one place to another, or you are churning out the food in your body. That comes all under the metabolic activity. And this metabolic activity includes the breaking down of the food, and this metabolic activity helps in the movement, and which might create heat at some moment of time. So fish, another thing is, they lose the heat. So when the fish loses the heat, this metabolic heat goes out through their gills, and this happens because the heated blood which is there in the fish, it runs through the vessels in the gills, which come to the close contact with the cold water outside basically, and this heat gets lost to the water. Now there is a very specific term which we use over here. It's called poikilothermy. Now, to before we go further into the poikilothermy, what is actually a poikilothermy? So the poikilothermy comes from the word poikilotherm, and which means the animal whose internal temperature or the internal body temperature varies considerably, and it considerably varies according to their environment basically. So this is a basic word which we use for the poikilothermy. So certain fishes like sharks and tuna, they are exceptions to this poikilothermy. And like shark and tuna, they can control their body temperature using a paired blood vessel system, and where the warm blood is going through the gills. And the gills, of course, are used for this water purposes also. So the warm blood goes through the gills and swaps the heat to the colder blood. It means this is moving or transferring from one place to another, and by the through the gills, and they keep their body blood temperature higher than the pure poikilothermic fishes. Now, if you understand that the process in this is basically the gills, which is transferring the blood from one place to another. Sometimes you also call it the osmoregulation process in the scientific terms. So, before we go into the depth, we have some classification of the difference in the ocean fishes. And this is like what we have to understand before we go into the further classification of the fish. When we classify them into the fish water, brackish water, we have to understand basically why the salt, some of the fishes are living in the sea, and why some of the fishes are living in, how you can say, the fresh water and the warm water. So this is all making a differentiation. But before that, we will go about and study about the differences in the ocean and the freshwater fish. And if you see, the salt water is found in the earth, oceans, and the seas, and it's quite different from the fresh water, which is in the lakes and the rivers, and which is in the streams across the globe. And plants and animals are adapted to live in one another type of water or the other. But few of these can thrive in both. I mean, the few of the fishes can survive in both of them, and some fishes are able to tolerate what is called a brackish water. Uh, we will go further and explain what brackish water is. The brackish water is which results when the fresh water from the sea or the river, it drains into the saltwater body and lowers the saltwater salinity. To further understand it, you can take an example of how you say estuary, and there are some of the places where the seawater and the river water meets with each other. So the places where the seawater and the river water meets at each other, they are around a stretch which is very big, and that creates a brackish water situation in these types. So first we go about what is the salinity and how it differs, the different salinities. So, what is the difference in salinity? The first thing is about the salt water. If you understand that the salt water contains salt, or what you call that, sodium chloride, NaCl, and fresh water may contain some amount of salt, but it's not enough to be considered as a salt water. The ocean water have a salinity which is on an average of 3.5%. If we say what is the meaning of 3.5%, it means 35 grams of salt is dissolved in every liter of the seawater. And the salinity lends itself to the other differences between the ocean and the freshwater. So this is how the differentiation comes basically, and this poses a challenge. It creates an environment of challenge for the organisms which are thriving in the salt water. And it is believed or well so known fact that the salt in the ocean comes from the salt leaching out of the ocean floor, because it was a total conversion, and the metamorphism all changed out. So the salt in the ocean water is from the salt which is coming out from the ocean floor, and salt is also carried out by the rivers and the streams. So this creates the first difference, that the salt water is salty and having a very high amount of salinity, which is approximately 35 grams in per 100 per liter of water. Second thing we differentiate between the ocean and the fresh water is about the density. Now, salt water is denser than the fresh water, and it's because of the sodium chloride present in it. Plus, there might be some ions and minerals which are more attached to it. This means that the specific volume of the water is heavier than the same amount of the fresh water. Now there is another thing which goes into it, that the warm salt water is less dense than the cold salt water, and this results in the cold water sinking to the ocean floor. So the cold water is always on the downside, and the warmer water, because it is less dense, it will come on the top of the ocean. So colder water is less denser when it freezes into ice. You all know, I hope, by the scientific way that when the ice water turns into ice, this is more less dense, and it starts to float on the surface. You must have seen the movie Ice Age, and you understand there is a water down, and this upper side is the ice where every animal starts to move out. And on this, there is a third point, which is the freezing point. Both freezing and boiling points of the water differ from the fresh water, but only the freezing point is of the concern in this current nature thing. The average freezing point for the ocean water is -2 degree. As per, if you calculate the normal one, it is 0 degree. So the average freezing point for the ocean water, which is -2, and it can be even lower than that if the salt content is higher. So the salt content or the salinity changes the freezing point of the water, and it also depends on the pressure of the water. There is a formula in the science which says HPG, height upon pressure upon the area. So this is used for the freezing times, and the typical freezing point for the fresh water is, of course, 0 degree. It starts to go by the 4 degree, but it is 0 degree. And one of the last thing which differs the seawater from the fresh water is the tonicity. So when we talk about the tonicity, when the water with a different concentration of the salt or any solute, it is positioned across a semi-permeable membrane, and the water will flow to the side of the membrane with the higher solute concentration. And it is an attempt to even out the concentration of the solutes. It's You can think like this: you take a bottle and you put another bottle and you seal the bottle, but the water is inside the bottle. Now, one bottle is having a lot of rasna in it, and another bottle is having a lot of ruabza in it. So when you fill both the bottle, you seal it on the top, and you will put the rasna bottle on top of the ruabza bottle. You will find that after some times they are getting even with each other, and they are getting a proper amount of same coloring. This is what you call a process of osmoregulation or osmoprosis, which is going through one place to another. So this is what is happening when they are positioned across a semi-permeable membrane. So, when discussing the water, tonicity is important for the plants and animal species, basically living in the body of the water, because there are various plants and animals. So, the tonicity becomes an important factor. Salt water is hypertonic to the tissues in the plant and animal. And this actually means that these animals lose water to their environment. As a result, to have constantly drinking water and losing out the salt. This is the same case with us, that we drink the water and we lose the salt. And but apart from that, conversely, if we talk about it, the fresh water is hypotonic to the animals and plants, and these animals really need to take in water, and they must excrete them. The fresh water, if you have seen, we are taking it or the plant is taking it, but it is coming out. We usually take a very little amount of water, and it by the slowly gradual development of our body. So these organisms really rarely need to take in the water, and they must excrete it before and often, and before it is readily absorbed. And the absorption of the water is just because the even out the salt concentrations in your body. Uh, just a minute. Now there is a classification of the fish, which is on the basis of the freshwater fish, brackish water fish, and seawater fish. In the culinary world, if you will see, you have different fishes coming on from different places. Some of the fishes, just to brief you before we go into the depth, some of the fishes you get from the freshwater, they have a very different or a peculiar taste. It all depends on the salinity, of course, and what we have talked about, the temperatures zones from whichever it is coming. Second thing, if you understand the oysters, so some people might have studied out in their F&B sections and the kitchen sections that the oyster is a delicacy. The point is, every oyster coming from a different angle have a different virtue and different natures. There are oysters which are coming from Japan, there are European oysters, and there are French oysters. If you go a little bit into the depth of the study, you will find that these oysters all have a different taste, because the water at every moment, if they are coming from the Japan, which is all surrounded by the water, will have a peculiar taste. And the European water, which has having a different amount of salt, if you have read the salt, there is the fluorocarbon, which is a very expensive salt, and it is coming from the estuaries basically. So when the oysters are breeding over there, they have a very different world by the nature, and they are tasting totally different. So the when you say the oysters coming out, and they have a very good taste, and they are French oysters, so the water is all making a difference. Okay, so we will talk about the freshwater fish now. The freshwater fish are those that spend most of or all of their lives in the fresh water, and they might be doing these lifespan in the rivers or lakes. Now, the salinity of the fresh water is something 0.5%. And these environment different from the marine conditions in many ways. The marine conditions, we mean the sea conditions, and the most obvious is being the difference in the level of the salinity. What we have talked about is 0.5% of the salinity in the seawater, so they are different. And to survive in the fresh water, the fish needs a range of psychological adaptations. When we talk about the psychological adaptations, they have to change their behavior of living. And then there are 41% of the all known species of the fish which are living in the freshwater. If we take the 100%, like we are saying, 32,000 species of the fish are known. So you consider like 15% or 12%, 10% are living in the freshwater. And this has happened because there is a rapid specialization and to the scattered habitats, which makes it possible. And by this, you may understand the fish obviously are responding animals. The fish have basically gills. And if you can see the picture, this is a picture of the Rohu family, which is a freshwater fish. This is basically a white fish, and it is non-oily. See, we will classify the fish later by the oil and other behavior, but this is just to make you understand that the fish have scales over here. Now, if we are talking that the fish have scales, this is very necessary for the survival of the fish. Of course, the gills also, because gills and the scales are the ones which are basically letting the flow of your oxygen or the water regulation in your body. These are Rohu is the Indian name for this fish, and it is in the European countries or outside of India, it is also known as the carp family. Then we have the katla, and we call it in English only katla. There is might be another name, but which I seriously don't know. And there is ilch or this hilsa, and this is a little bit oily fish. We will talk about later how the oily fish changes, what is the omega-3 behavior in the fish. And this is from the herring family basically, and have a very light pinkish fish. And this is magur, and this is called a walking catfish. So this is the psychological difference of the fish. So first one is called, we talk about the gills. Now the freshwater fish differ psychologically from the saltwater fish, and it differs in several respects. Their gills are able to diffuse the dissolved gases while keeping the salt in the body fluids inside. So if you understand it, the gills are there which will diffuse, means mix up the dissolved gases, and the salt will be inside the body. Now their scales reduce this water diffusion. The scales reversify the process, and it reduces the water diffusion through the skin. So freshwater fish that do not have too much of these scales, that fish will eventually die out. And they also have well-developed kidneys to reclaim the salt from the body fluids and before the excretion. Now, there are some of the fishes which are exceptions to that, and these migrating fish, which you call the basically sturgeons, and you must have read about the caviar. So caviar is coming out of the sturgeon fish, and if you talk about beluga cervuga, that we keep on for later. But if we talk about the sturgeon, they are both found in the salt water and the fresh water in the stationary forms. So this species of fish do produce in the fresh water, but spend most of their adult lives in the sea. And then, because of this behavior of the fish, they are called the anadromous fish. So, for the anadromous fish, this species of fish reproduce in fresh water but live in the seawater. You can say the salmon, or you have trout, and there are other fishes like sea lamprey, and there might be a three-spined stickleback. There are a lot of varieties of the fish which do anadromous behavior. The another one is the catadromous fish. When we talk about the catadromous fish, they, on the contrary, are born in the salt water but live most of the part in the fresh water. So it's controversial, to each other, that how they live. For catadromas, if you may understand it again, they are born in salt water but live in fresh water. So the salmon lives in salt water, but they come into the fresh water. And generally, while doing these things, I just remembered one thing. What I want to tell you, there is a thing which is called spawning. Spawning. And spawning is a process by which fishes do the reproduction. The fishes, for their spawning processes, for example, there is a salmon, and the salmon goes to the fresh water. Now, in the fresh water, the salmon will leave the sperms, which will be eventually met with the ovaries of the female fish. And this is called the spawning process, and there is no direct contact of the body, so the thing passes on from one place to another, and in a area, confined area, basically. So there is a classification of the fish, and which will be further studied out. But to understand this, there are species which are migrating between the fresh and the salt water, and these type of fishes have adapted themselves. What I'm talking about is a catadromous fish and what you call anadromous fish. They have adaptations for both the environment. So when they are in the salt water, they need to keep the bodily salt concentration on a level which is lower than the surroundings. And many species solve this problem, and they do it by associating different habitats with the different stages of life. So both eels, or what you call the anadromous salmon, farmfish, or the sea lamprey, they have different tolerances in the salinity in the different stages of their life. Now there is a classification which is based on the body temperature, which is basically very common in the fresh water, because when you talk about the people, they always like to have a fresh water, because the seawater has somewhat a urea attached to it, or which we call a TAMO, or trimethylene phosphates, which creates a smelly fish. So when we talk about the fresh water fish, we classify also on the temperature of the water. And among the fishes, the freshwater species are usually classified by the water temperature in which they survive, basically. So the water temperature will affect the amount of oxygen, as cold water will contain more oxygen. So the cold water fish under this classification, these species survive in the very cold temperatures, and the preferring a water temperature which can be from 0 degree, 4 degree to minus 15 degree. And the air temperature that result in the sufficiently cold waters are found in the northern regions, and it's, if you go out of India, you can say there are northern United States, or United Kingdoms, or where they have a high elevation. Uh, and then there are, if you talk about the fishes which are in the cold water, they are basically the brown trout, or the rainbow trout. And in India, they are in the Mahseer, or the Himalayan trout. There are the varieties like Mahseer and Himalayan trout. And you can find them in the northeastern states like Assam, or in the Garhwal foothills also. So if you are about to travel and go a little bit above this Auli region, or you move on to this Uttarkashi and you go to Harsil, you can find out these trouts over in there, and they are Himalayan trouts basically. So second one is the classification on the basis of warm water. So warm water fishes species can survive in a wide range of conditions. The preferring water temperature, which is sometimes 27 degrees centigrade. So warm water fish can survive in cold winter temperature in the northern states, but they like to thrive in this warmer water. They can survive. It doesn't mean that if there's a warm water fish, it will eventually die. By the northern climates, I mean, if you are talking about the extreme temperatures which might happen in the hills or in the countries where there is a northern region. So they can survive even in the warm water, and it includes, like you heard of the carp. We have just shown you a picture of the carp, which was rohu basically, and catfish. Catfish is very common nowadays because it can eat outside, which is not good for the fish water, and then they create in themselves very good meat in it. So there is a fish called the largemouth bass, and they are all basically the warm water fishes. And then we have the classification, another one, which is the cold water. So the cool water fish prefer a temperature which is between the cold water and the warmer water, which is something around in between 16 to 27 degrees centigrade. And they are found throughout the north, and except for the southern portions of it. Now, the common cold water species, they include musclinge, pike, or this perch variety. Then we come down to the brackish water fishes, and this is a gray mullet, or what you call in India as the shatut or the boi fish. We have the sea bass, and in Hindi or in the Bengal region, it is called bektis. And this is what we were talking about, the mud skipper, what we have shown you before. This mud skipper basically lives outside. They have developed anatomically their gills, and they can survive. So this is also a brackish water fish. Uh, so there are something which are specialities of the brackish water fish. The brackish water fish is in many of our coastal states in India, and there are river and estuary systems. Estuary systems, what we have talked about is maybe a bay or a lagoon. And wherever the water flows into the salt water and creates a brackish water environment, means it is a mixture of fresh and salt water. And the estuary basically may be called a bay. For example, you have Bay of Bengal, and it can called be a slog, like the slogs in Andhra Pradesh. And if you talk about a little bit more, going to the depth, there might be the ghats. The Western Ghats are very famous in India. And in the front office, you must have studied that this ghat are the area where the water is moving from one place to another in the form of small channel lines, and they create a water-bound system over there. So that is where the brackish water fishes or the brackish water conditions are generally developed in the region. So the main advantage of fishing in the brackish water is that you have an opportunity to catch a wide variety of salt water and the fresh water, because the temperature in the sea changes. The salt water and the brackish water, they just come out in the one area, and this is called the gaming of the fishes in the same area. Last time I remember Manan has asked what is a fish game. So I brought it to a point that I remember Mr. Manan, and I would like to answer him at that moment of time. So when you have a brackish water, what we have told you before also, but didn't tell you what is a brackish water is, that the fish species in that area are basically best for the gaming of the fishes, because there is a condition when the fishes are moving on from one place to another. And these brackish water fishes have a higher tolerance and for varying level of water salinity. And there are some examples of the brackish water, and it includes varieties which we have shown you over here: the mud skipper, sea bass, baked tea, and apart from that, we have channel catfish, and we have the peacock bass or the striped bass. And there are a lot varieties. So I will suggest you a book if you want to buy it out. There is called a book of ingredients, and you can always look out that book because there are so many varieties when we talk about. And of course, if you don't see them before your eyes, it's very different. But somewhere, if you will remember a name, it will become much more easier for you to understand it at some moment of time. You basically need a theory to bring it to a practicality. I think you all want are trying to become managers, so it makes a different issue at this time. So the bracket water fishing is generally done at the spots where there is a brackish tidal flow, and those times when the brackish tidal flow is basically those times when the tide is either rising or falling. There are sea tides coming out, and this gaming of the fish you do generally at that point where the tides are coming out, because then the fishes are coming on to the sides and towards the river sides. And you hopefully are very well familiar with the shrimps, or what you call the chinga in our language, and the finger mullets, and they are found at the best times in this brackish water fishes. So red drum or snooks or the tarpons are all over there to find it out. Now, the brackish water is associated with two terms, and there is a salinity in the water in the river also. But when we talk about the brackish water, it is according to the saline water, right? Now, how do we define the word saline? Because you are into the culinary world and you every day read what is a brine solution, and we put the things in the brine solution because I have seen students asking these questions in a few times. So, what is a brine solution and what is a saline, and how they differ? So, the term what is a saline, it will indicate the presence of concentration of the ions which are in the water. So this can be a salt, for example, sodium. It can be a magnesium. Even you can put aluminium in the water, which you might not see if you are cooking in the aluminium pots at your home. And the relative magnitude of this concentration generally determines the salinity of the water. So if you haven't got this word, I'll repeat it again for you. The term saline indicates the presence of the dissolved ions, such as salt, and the magnitude of the concentration that determines the salinity of the water. And when we talk about the brine, brine is a water that is heavily saturated with ions and salt. I'm talking about the seawater. I'm talking about the 35 grams of salt in 1 liter of water. But when I'm talking about the brine, it is heavily saturated with the ions or the salt, and the saline solution becomes brine when the salt concentration hits around like 45,000 milligrams or 45 grams in per liter. So the brackish water is somewhat salty, but not as salty as the ocean part. It might have somewhat a value in between 1 to 3 or 5, depends which brackish water and what time it is coming and which time of the year, or when the tides are low or high. So just going to out of the hook, that the oysters are the key species which is found in the brackish water. Now, these are basically the oysters act as the filter feeders, and the oysters helps in the regulation of toxin in the water. They generally consume. That's why if you can see, the oysters are very different all the time in their color. And when it was the middle of the 20th century, a few remaining oysters became too toxic, because the human beings have started to throw out what is leftover of ours, or what is our garbage. It has started to go out in the sea, and it becomes too toxic for the consumption. And because we study sustainability also, and today there are several groups who are establishing oyster beds to repopulate the region, and they want to just have the native species, and by this they generally reduce the pollution in the estuaries, or how you get the brackish water. Another thing out of the hook, that many ospreys have been overfished, and because of this, some species of the tuna, for example, the Pacific bluefish tuna, are endangered. But their range has been drastically reduced. And one of the thing which Japan is the largest markets for the bluefish tuna, and these tuna, they start to go to the estuary of the Tokyo Bay where they are hunted, or they are taken out or cultivated, but you can say, and a lot. And but the market is getting over and over crowded, and the things are getting worse and worse in these conditions. So we have to think of something like a sustainability for making the fishes grow in a normal manner, or we can start to cultivate the fish by making our irrigation process in our area, like you are doing, cultivating it out in some cases. Then there is saltwater fish, which is one of the last thing what we will hopefully discuss for that day. And categorization of the salt fish is by the habitats in which they live in. So one of them is coastal fish. The another one is deep sea fish, pelagic fish, and the demersal fish. To understand it better, uh, the sea is too wide. It's vast. 70% of our planet is seawater. So if you understand, the sea has different depths, and the sea have different water because the salt concentration is different at different moment. Some sea is to the Antarctica stretch, so the when we go over there or start to do in that line, if you go to Finland or Norway, they have very good system, but the it's too much cold weather over there, so the fish also changes. So we consider the fish by the habitats also they live in. And when we talk about it, we talk about the coastal fish first. And the coastal fish is basically an offshore fish or a neritic fish. They are just the name offshore means that they are away from, a little bit far away from the shore of the fish. And they inhabit the area between the shoreline and edge of the shelf or the continental shelf. Continental, by the word, when we mean the continental shelf, there is a shift in the lining. They are not into, they are a little bit farther going. Then there is deep sea fish, and the deep sea fish lives below the photic zones. The photic zones means that where there is not enough light which penetrates for the photosynthesis of the plants which is under the water to happen. So deep sea fish are into a very high depth, and it is below the photic zone. Then there is a pelagic fish, and the pelagic fish lives basically the surface area. If you talk about the anchovies, and they are basically the pelagic fish. The story, if I will forget it before I tell you the pelagic fish one, the anchovies, when the weather is changing, the anchovies start to move down from the inner depth of the water, and they start to move towards the surface of the sea. And this is a time which is October, November in the France, when they are actually taking out the fishes over in that region. Then there is a demisceral fish, which basically live on, or they live near the bottom of the sea. And these are some of the varieties what we have talked about, like anchovies. When we talk about, so this is an Indian anchovy. The European anchovy is almost same, but the color is little bit more darkish grayish on their side. Uh, and the name is Nethili in the Indian. And then there is Rawas, which is Indian salmon, what you also call. Of course, there are a lot of salmons, and the diet of the salmon changes. But to tell you that the Indian salmon might feel like it doesn't have that pinkish grade or the dark reddish grade what we see in the Norwegian salmon, or we can see from the Baltic Sea region. The reason behind it is that it is about the amount of food what you get in there. The fish color will also depend what they are eating and what they are absorbing. So the rawas in India have a very different color than this, and of course it depends on the breed also. We will discuss it in the next lesson. Then there is butterfish or the pomfret. It is less oily fish and very famous fish in India for making the tandoori items. And the meat is a bit stiffer in these kind of fishes. Then this is a bombil or Bombay duck. It doesn't mean that it is like a duck or something, but the name has been kept due to the movement. Like the duck keeps on moving, this fish also have a very high grade of movement, which it goes from one place to another. And this is the classification of the fish basically. This we will go on and study in another class. But to get you a little bit brief, these what we have seen over here. The fish products are divided basically into the two categories. This I'm showing to you that at least you can see it at your home and just have a idea before you go into the depth of it. So the classification of the fish, this is what we will read next time as per the culinary world and what we are actually into. So the classification of the fish is divided into two categories. One is fin fish, which we call the fish with fins, and the fish with the skeleton. And then we have another fish which we call the shellfish. And this is shellfish is without the external shells and do not have an internal bone structure. And this further classification has been done into oily fish and the round fish. And then we have invertebrates, which we have divided into shellfish and cephalothed. To make you understand and give a brief review, which we will do the next time, the shellfish is the fishes like prawn, shrimps, or lobster, and even the mollusks come under it. You can say a scampi comes under it. Cephalopods are basically like your octopus or your squid, and they don't have any bony structure which is attached to them. And please, you are open for questions. So if you have any questions, then please ask. Okay. Do saltwater fish contains more oil than fresh water? We will study this in depth next time, but before I tell you, you have to understand one thing. The oil or the fat percentage depends upon the movement of the fish. For example, if I am doing a more exercise, I will have less amount of fat attached to my body. This happens same with the fish. If the fish is doing a lot of movement in the water, then the fish might be having a less amount of your what you call that fat in them or the oil in them. The another thing which you have to understand that when we talk about the fish oil, I'm telling you from the nutrition point of view, it is very rich in omega 3, or you can say EFA, and which helps your body to get all what you need, which you are not getting anyhow from any of the food. So fish is actually helping in getting you omega 3 value, which is attached to it. And there is a question which somebody has asked. He wants to know what is basically how you say the tonicity. And now, if you go to the back, just a minute, please. Explain the tonicity and explain how the tonicity helps in making a difference in the living of the fishes. Okay, see, the thing is, when you talk about the tonicity, there are water, and when the water have different amount of concentrations of the salt, uh, and it is positioned through a semi-permeable membrane. A semi-permeable membrane can be the gill of a fish. Please understand and listen to it very carefully and write down the words. If you don't understand, I'll explain it to you later. Uh, when the water with a different concentration of the salt and it is positioned across a semi-permeable membrane. When I talk about a semi-permeable membrane, it is the gill of the fish, right? And the water will flow to the side of the membrane with the higher solute concentration. I gave you an example. For example, I'll make it more simple. I put water which is having less salt and sugar, and I make another solution which is having more salt and solution. Now, okay, my water glass. I'll show you with this. For example, I have this glass of water, and my glass of water has less salt solution in it. Now I take another glass which I make higher solute concentration. Now I will put somewhere a bloating paper on top of it. And when I put a bloating paper on top of it and I turn on the glass, another one, and I seal it from the sides, the water will flow from one part to the another, and it eventually get evenly, like the water, the concentration of the solutes, which I mean the salt and sugar, it will get even. It's like you put it on the top of a glass and shake it out, you will find that the solution has gone to equal values. So this is what we mean by the tonicity. So water will flow from one side of the membrane to a higher solute in an attempt to get the even out concentration of the solutes. So this is basically what we talk about the tonicity. Okay. Temperature of water fish lives in also affect the time period for which it has been. Temperature of fish lives. It is the temperature of. I couldn't get this question. Temperature of water of fish lives in. Uh, I don't get this question. I'm sorry. You can write it again. The temperature of water of fish lives in also. No, sorry, I don't understand the question. Which fish is tasty, salt or river? Uh, Sir, understand one basic thing in the culinary world, or it depends what your diet plan is, how you are grown up socially, what is your mental behavior, what is your social aspects. If you have eaten a soya sauce, you might not eat a soya sauce every day. It comes from China or Japan or Thailand. But if you are from China or Japan, then you will eat more over there. Now, if I'm talking about, if I give a you every day tacos or nachos, I hope so 10% of you will eat it every day. Not every one of you. So saltwater fish or the freshwater fish, doesn't matter. Yes, we will discuss it later. Why there is a change in the concentration of the fishes and why the things change at that moment of time. It is just your taste buds. Saltwater fish have a lot of urea attached to it. There might be a mercury level, which we will discuss later, to the fish in that. Uh, okay, somebody has asked, explain poikilothermia again. Okay, uh, get down to the simple part. I am a human being, and my body temperature is regulated through my body. A fish cannot regulate its body temperature. The fish is dependent upon the surrounding water. I have again this glass for you, and I will put a fish in here, right? The fish will not be able to control that temperature. If I put a warm water fish into this glass of water, the fish will eventually die. If you, any one of you have what you call the fish aquarium at your home, you see that the person who gives you fish from the aquarium gives you in a plastic bag or a glass bag, and you bring that fish to your home, and then you don't put the fish directly into the aquarium which you have brought from outside. You take the aquarium water and slowly mix that aquarium water and put the fish and let the fish adjust out. There is a difference in the temperature, there is a difference in the behavior of the fish. So the piclothermy is for those organisms or the animals who don't control their body temperature by themselves. I hope this is what I was. Okay, difference between the brackish fish and the sea. Okay, the brackish fish. Sir, understand it on a very simple terms. I have river and I have a sea. And in between the river and the sea, there is a place where they meet. Some people call it estuary, some people call it bay. Please understand, if you don't understand, you can ask me again next time. So, when I have a place where the water and the river is mixing, there will be a difference in the salt concentration because the river water has different salinity or the saline value or the salt value, and the seawater has a different salt value. The river water has 0.5% of salt, and the seawater have 35% of the salt in it. In 1 liter, I'm talking about. So when there will be a place where they will mix it up, where they mix it up, the water environment changes over there. It's like you take a glass of water, you take a hot cup of tomato soup, and you try to bring it to your lips. Now, the glass, what you call, is solid. Your lips are different. You understand all the different words. There will be a steam which is created, which is totally of different value. So the brackish water becomes totally of different value, and the salt solution there goes to a different value. So some of the times the brackish water is used by some of the fishes to breed out or to go from one environment to another. I give you an example. For example, there was a fish which was salmon, and the salmon lives in another water, which is a seawater, goes down to river water, which is a clean water, and it passes through the brackish water basically. So that river water is not river water where it is actually going. That is the brackish water in between the river and the sea where she can give birth. Now, if she goes to the river water or the eggs will have a different concentration coming out of the body, and they will not be able to produce out because the salmon is able to live in a total different environment. So this makes a bit of difference in the brackish and the seawater. And I hope we will finish for that day. And next time we are going to study about this, and we will talk more in depth about the nutrition part of the fish, how fish is related. Because see, we don't only talk about the fish part; we talk about as being a chef or a leader or a manager somewhere, and you can have a situation where the people are asking you what is this fish? And see, you can always say in one term, it's sea bass. And you are going abroad and you go to a five-star Michelin, the three-star Michelin restaurant, and you want to eat a fish over there, and you are talking about salmon. And it is written over there, maybe a Norwegian salmon. So how will you make it understand which part of the we are into the food industry where we have to explain the things to another person, and being a good cook or being a good manager, anyhow, I think so it is needed by you. And so we will take a break for the day and have a good time. And if any questions, please collect them for the next class, or you can send it to me on my WhatsApp, and we will be very happy to answer that. Thank you. Have a nice day.